My introductory remarks. Please furnish feedback as we go. If you have questions or comments, the more feedback, the better for us. And again, our goal is to provide a starting point for council's consideration of a budget, and from there forward, work with the council to shape that budget to meet your expectations and priorities according to your judgment. So presented for council's consideration are the recommended general fund and enterprise budgets for fiscal year 2025. The general fund balances at $65.7 million and is based on the current tax and fee rates. As such, the budget responds chiefly to council's generally communicated, though perhaps not unanimously prioritized, goal of affordability. Additionally, the budget continues contribution for the development of Nature's Crossing Technology Center, a prioritized goal in the current budget. The recommended budget provides for a meaningful compensation increase for employees and makes key investment in public safety departments. New revenue of about $4 million derived from economic growth and development supports the following recommended key expenditure increases. A $1 million increase in support for Waynesboro Public Schools, determined by a funding formula. A 5% salary and wage increase for eligible employees effective January 2025. An increase in city support for the Waynesboro First Aid Crew. Restoration of 12 months of 2 frozen sworn police positions and 2 new police authorizations for a 6-month period. A little bit more about those funded priorities. Employee compensation. While vacancies persist in public works and police departments, retention has improved. The recommended 5% increase is important and will help the city compete for and retain qualified candidates in the labor market. Even in the improved environment, the Waynesboro and other localities are challenged to hire public works employees, public safety employees, and individuals with technical skills or certification in fields such as engineering and information technology. Regarding public safety, the budget increases the city's financial contribution to the Waynesboro First Aid Crew, helping to compensate for the fact that revenue recovery does not fully fund the operation of that agency. EMS obviously is an essential community service. There are funds in the budget to restore 2 frozen sworn officer positions and to add 2 new sworn positions for 6 months. Additionally, I recommend funding for a building inspector to meet demand created by a residential and commercial construction activity. Affordability. It is noteworthy that at 77 cents, Waynesboro's real property tax rate is the second lowest among the 37 cities in the Commonwealth. Only Williamsburg has a lower real estate rate. The third lowest rate is 83 cents in Winchester. Waynesboro's personal property rate is the 8th lowest among Virginia cities. With only limited exception, service levels and programs are generally regarded favorably. The council and staff should take some measure of satisfaction in meeting community needs at tax rates which are among the lowest in the Commonwealth. The last several years have seen new public and private investment improving employment and recreational opportunities in our community. Appreciable residential and commercial growth is encouraging and affirms that Waynesboro is an attractive community in which to live, conduct business, and recreate. As the community continues to grow, the City Council and staff should monitor service requirements and preferences and supply the necessary staff, equipment, and capital resource to deliver them. Increasing fee and tax rates may be necessary to accomplish service objectives, and I encourage City Council to be receptive to recommendations, especially in public works and public safety. Similarly, there are opportunities to increase capital investment, replacing old and delivering new basic infrastructure such as sidewalks and bus stops. Funding for maintenance and non-allowable or locally responsible roads is continued in this budget. It may be informative to know that municipal staffing levels have remained nearly level since 2008. public safety departments, police, fire, emergency operations center, and the building official are all functioning at 2008 staffing levels collectively. While the recommended budget increases position authorizations in the police department and the building official's office, the request for additional firefighter authorizations is unmet. Transitioning to enterprise funds, rate increases are recommended in the water, sewer, and refuse funds. The increase in the water fund, 2%, supports anticipated debt service for the capital investment of a booster station and line to improve pressure and volume. In the refuse fund, the additional revenue, $2 per month, is needed to construct a new disposal cell, relocate the scale house, and acquire heavy equipment at the regional landfill. Costs are shared by member jurisdictions, which include Stanton, Waynesboro, and Augusta County. Increases in the sewer fund offset inflationary factors impacting labor, construction, materials, and energy-related expenses. As is our practice, we'll focus primarily on general fund this evening, get into more detail related to the enterprise funds at a subsequent work session, and additionally undertake a discussion review of CIP at that time as well. Would like to thank you for your consideration and recognize our staff who assemble the budget, and then also the broader organization that works so hard on a daily basis to convert a spending plan into beneficial services and programs for our community. With that, I'll hand it off to Cameron. Actually, I'll review our agenda for the balance of the presentation. So we're going to devote some additional and specific time to noteworthy expenditure changes, noteworthy revenue changes, a discussion of how we balance, and then a review of the capital investment plan, enterprise funds, and then we'll discuss next steps. And again, I can't emphasize enough the importance of furnishing feedback that you have this evening, or developing opinions and guidance to furnish subsequently. Cameron.
Thank you, sir. That red really struggles to show up, doesn't it? So the most recent work session, or the second council retreat kind of that we had, I put a slide up that was talking about noteworthy expenditure changes from the base budget from the prior year, from the adopted budget from the prior year to the base budget to this year. And so what I try to do here, and I'll email this out to everyone since the red's a little bit tough to see and verbally go through it. Things that changed, I highlighted in red. So as an example, like the school funding formula is done off of formula. We knew what that was going to be from the minute we finished the act for last year. So that hasn't changed. The VRS rate increase hasn't changed since the last time we talked. So the things in red are the things that either got added in as a supplemental or have changed, mostly added as a supplemental, or maybe changed just a little bit from the base budget. So the first one, again, I know it's hard to see, is the 5% raise midway through the year. Total value for that for compensation and benefits is $491,000. The next one down here is the police positions. 2 full year and 2 half year. Total for that is $208,000. As we kind of talked about last time in the second council retreat, we feel like the overtime's getting to a point in that fund where you can start to justify the other positions, pay the overtime for a year, and then recoup the savings in overtime to cover the position. So we think the manpower after 1 year will result kind of in a net level, or a net neutral on expenditures. It's just the trick is getting through that first year, which likely means we'll need to appropriate some fund balance to cover the overtime. That would be an appropriate use of the fund balance because we do anticipate it being one time. Next line down was some IT hardware additions for about $170,000. Those are things like computer replacements, peripherals that we generally cut out of the budget and pay for with fund balance. I cut that back another $100,000, and that'll appear on your uses of fund balance as we talk about them in July. You do have an IT reserve that you can use to pay for those. The rebate for sales and meals at the Waynesboro Marketplace was also on there. The way that we do the sales and meals tax estimates. So for a long time, we just did a 3-year average because it was pretty flat. It might go up 4 or 5% every year. It might go down a couple percent, or a couple percent. The last couple of years, it's been rising so quickly that we've monitored those numbers through the end of the previous, or through the budget in the current fiscal year, and went back and basically budgeted what we received in the prior year, saying we're ahead of pace for this year. The actuals that we received last year are still probably a conservative estimate, less conservative than the 3-year average, but the 3-year average has gotten so far behind that it's not really realistic. The one piece of that, though, is those are new economic development agreements that are up and running, so they aren't in your previous year actual numbers. So the thought process behind that is, as we start to get those amounts in to pay next year, and we see the realizations from those meals and sales taxes, since they weren't in there last year, we can appropriate those funds at that time, because in theory you should see an increase in your meals and sales to offset those. So you would just do, in addition to meals and sales, and in addition to the Economic Development Authority, pay the Economic Development Authority, and they would pay the developer for those. And they do have to turn in proof of, the way the code's written, they do have to turn in proof of both meals and sales to the Economic Development Authority, that then Greg, being he, can turn over to the commissioner for verification, and then we pay the developer agreement back. Health insurance, we did, I think, a 9% increase estimate last year, which was about what it hit. The way health insurance runs, you start your new plan year on January 1, so we only budget that for a half year. So that's the other half from last year. We actually got good news on the health insurance rates for this year, and the actuary thinks they're only going to go up 1% or 2%. So this year's increases don't even really present on here, because they're kind of under the $100,000 or so threshold that I try to use when we're talking about the big changes. Paving equipment of $125,000. We were trying to work that back into the base budget, because but it is a one-time cost. So the past few years we've cut that out. We have funds in what you would call the old fleet fund that we've been appropriating to pay for that, and we can do that again this year on an appropriation in July, if that's what council desires to do. Code enforcement position for a half a year, $35,000. That's under the threshold that I would generally bring to your attention, but it is a new position, so I thought it probably prudent to put it on here. And that ends up with a total budget increase of $4.1 million. Again, same as the slide from last time. If you add all those up, because I don't include every single thing that goes up and down, it's about $3.4 million identified there of the $4.1 million in changes. And then there's a very detailed, various levels of detail, but a very detailed line-by-line expenditure budget, if you want to go through that. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. But the big things I've pulled out and put up there. So the next slide is, how do we fund the noteworthy expenditure changes? So what were the noteworthy revenue changes? So the real estate tax revenue, the increase there pretty much comes from new development, new build, finalization of appraisals and everything last year. Personal property, we do that based off of what was received in the previous year. So as we were doing the estimates last year and recoupled the rates, we had concerns on how much they were going to drop. So the estimates last year were pretty conservative because we had situations where they had inflated incredibly quickly. When we were working with the commissioner, she was saying, this is about how much I think they'll drop. So that's kind of what we estimated when we recoupled the rate. When all was said and done, it ended up being, the actuals ended up being higher, along with, that also has some increase. So it has motor vehicles, but it also has any machinery and tools increases, any personal property from businesses increases in it as well. Sales and meals tax, the sales I think was about 200,000, 300,000 of that, and the meals was the larger piece of that increase, but about a $900,000 budget estimate increase. Interest revenues of $484,000. That account continues to go up. That's one, though, that I would strongly suggest we continue to monitor. That those rates are closely tied to two things: how much are we holding in reserves, which we're working now to spend down ARPA funds. We're working now on some CIP projects that had gotten backed up, so we have some cash in the bank that inflates our base, and then also the Fed borrowing rate, that those items are invested in CDs that are not tied to but do correlate with the Fed borrowing rate. So if the Fed starts to decrease interest rates as inflation gets under control, you'll see that interest revenue start to drop. The last couple reports I saw said that they had no interest in decreasing the rates until at least the middle of this year, and as many rate hikes as they did. This is about what you received last year, is what we'll end up budgeting. So I don't have a concern that you won't hit it next year, but if you do start having to decrease that in the future, I wouldn't be completely surprised. But I don't have any concerns that it won't hit that mark in 2025, the budget year that we're talking about. Business licenses, those are based on estimations of sales within the city that the business owners pay. And I believe it's February or March. Again, used historical averages for that. Compensation board reimbursements. The compensation board did a couple of pretty large adjustments for a couple of the various departments. So as we work back through what we actually received last year, came out to about a $200,000 increase. And try to look at those a little bit closer, because if they make a change, we're required to push the change through to the constitutional office. So you don't want to push the change through on the expenditure side of the constitutional office, which you pick up, and not push the corresponding revenue through. And then VDOT urban maintenance funds, $360,000, I think is Councilman Short pointed out last time. That's just an increase to both sides of the ledger. You'll get an estimated additional $360,000 from VDOT, and we budgeted an estimated increase in expenditures for VDOT eligible items of $360,000. So that's just an increase on both sides of the ledger. The large revenue changes, because there's so fewer revenue accounts, are easier to pick out. So the total of those, the items on your screen, is about $4.1 million. But it all balances back to the $65,715,464 that Mr. Hant mentioned, and also the $4,183,710 on the expenditure side.
So we spend a little time talking about in recent years how we balance. So as a rule, you'll notice to manage the rate to some extent, we rely on fund balance to buy one-time expenditures such as replacement vehicles, technology equipment, mowers, things like that, which are, you actually buy things like that each year, but for accounting purposes, they're capital items that could be used legitimately or purchased legitimately with fund balance. So each year we estimate our revenues conservatively, and we've been tend to be good stewards and good managers of our resources. And then we also have unfortunately experienced higher levels of vacancy rates. So we generally end the year with a positive variance, which is the top box there. Revenues come in a little higher than we estimate, expenditures come a little under, and you have a positive variance, or what would be a profit in a private sector firm. So that positive variance becomes your fund balance, and then we, Cameron and the budget committee, essentially combs the budget requests that we receive from the departments for small capital items or replacement items that we could use fund balance to purchase. Rather than relying on recurring revenue, we cut those things out of the operating budget and use this fund balance here to buy them. Additionally, we try to exercise restraint in the use of the fund balance, make reasonable judgments about these replacement purchases, and then try to retain some balance for contribution to the CIP. And so that's how it's important. That's one way in which we are able to maintain a lower tax rate than we might otherwise would be. But part of the sort of the negative aspect of that approach is that these two contributions can fluctuate depending on the size of your fund balance. So if you have a year in which you had significant fund balance, obviously that makes these decisions a little bit easier. You can afford to make some additional small capital purchases, and you can probably afford to make a healthier contribution to your CIP. If you don't have a significant positive variance, then these choices become more difficult. There are localities that assume either benefit from a healthier revenue environment or assume a different financial philosophical environment or philosophical approach, and they incorporate these purchases in the operating budget. So your tax rate would increase sufficiently so that you were buying your replacement computers, your replacement HVAC, mowers, etc., with your operating funds. There are also localities that generate sufficient revenue to make a regular and consistent cash contribution to a CIP. We've made different choices in our community, and this is how we are able both to make progress and maintain replacement capital, make progress and make investment in our community, and also operate at a good stewardship level at a low tax rate. Next slide.
Let me grab this one. So, one thing with what Mr. Hamp was talking about on the appropriate uses of fund balance, I was on a call with a financial advisor that helps with bond ratings and things like that, and he explained it to me. If you picture a set of musical chairs, there was a locality that had found themselves in some trouble because they were pushing money back into their operating budget, basically using it to fund recurring expenditures. So if you can look at a bond rating agency and say, we reasonably wouldn't have to do that for a year or two if we had a year where we didn't have a positive variance, that's what they want to hear. And so that's where we try to identify things that reasonably you could go without a replacement for a year or two if you wanted to. And that's how we end up with the potential uses of fund balance list. What I would say, we have a list on the next page and a list on page 12, or next slide, and a list on page 12 of the budget book. We need to do some work at a staff level to comb the total, make sure that there's no opportunities to purchase any of those items this year, make sure that all of those items are items we want to do. The reason that we're comfortable with that is we don't actually have to appropriate those items until July, when the new fiscal year starts. So in order to give the departments as much time as possible to purchase the items, we've generally done that appropriation in July. So as you look through that list, we don't need to make decisions on any of those items this evening. We can bring those back. We do this exercise so that I have an idea as we're working through the CIP plan of how much of our unassigned fund balance are we going to use, or are we going to have left over for the CIP. And so, as you work through this list, if any one of these items, we get to a point where we say there's sufficient room in the budget for this year, maybe they didn't have, maybe a department didn't have an employee for part of the year, so they have some vacancy savings. Maybe they had an expenditure that they thought was going to be more, that they can purchase these items. You might find yourself in a spot where it ends up at 1.1 million or $1 million even. But what we don't want to do is end up committing these revenues to the CIP and then not have them and want to purchase these items. So I do it as an exercise to make sure that we're going to have sufficient funds for the capital improvement plan. And so,
Can we go back
Sure.
a slide and just make sure that the council has a chance to take a look at that list?
Okay.
Even though that this is not actually part of the budget you adopt, but it certainly is part of our budget process.
I think next one.
What are the office desks for 1 year?
I think that's just one office desk, and the way that I did in Public Works, and the way that I did the exercise was if the city manager, if the budget committee recommended the item, and I ended up pulling it because it was one time, I just included it here so that you could see a total. That's, again, if that's something, that's one that council's not interested in.
So is that a replacement plan where
Yes.
we get one
Yes.
per year for
Yeah.
how many years? Just one per year.
I don't know.
Everybody good? So I think it's pretty important to draw the council's attention and be clear in communication about items that are significant items that are not included in the budget. These are, some of these items we've talked about, some of them have been identified by staff. So we were not able to fund at current revenue levels any new firefighter positions. We did not include or fund a requested communications person. We were not able to fund the assistant registrar or the deputy registrar. The sheriff had some additional position requests which were not funded, keeping in mind that we made some improvements to compensation and staffing in the current fiscal year. And then VDOT allowable paving.
What do you mean by VDOT allowable paving?
You can take that, please.
Sure, so they put in a, we have 4 organizations that are eligible for VDOT funding. And so we don't put any local money towards those. So what we do is add up the 4 orgs, see what the estimate is from the VDOT and subtract them. And the plug or the balance is always to paving. So that's the amount. There was about $205,000 more in the paving account that they requested, that the Public Works requested, that was cut out to balance it with the corresponding revenues.
Oh, so subsidy.
Yes, sir.
Paving.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And and not to be confused, and just to make sure, maybe I'm the only one that would be confused by this, not to be confused with the local responsible paving that we've been funding through the CIP. We'll run that through as part of the CIP process. That's additional paving towards mill and paving on our VDOT allowable streets.
So we talked about the challenge that, or the dilemma that a manager faces, and how do you respond to mixed preferences with a council? As indicated, I've balanced the budget at 77 cents, or I should say we, the budget team, balanced the budget at 77 cents and with the current revenue structure. But to give some idea, if there were additional revenue, how might the manager prioritize the next several opportunities for investment or expense? And so with an additional penny, with a full additional penny, you could afford the wages and benefits for 3 additional firefighters, wages and benefits for the deputy registrar. If you had a second additional penny, we would suggest, or I would suggest, that you take a look at funding the code enforcement position for a full year. Currently, it's funded at 6 months, and I think to realize meaningful benefit in the current construction environment, having that individual in the workforce sooner rather than later would be meaningful. There is a communications and media representative in position that would be beneficial both for internal communication engagement and external communication engagement, both with citizens and with the media. And then finally, we think it would be a good idea to identify the balance of that remaining penny, which is about $160,000, if I remember correctly, as either additional funds in anticipation for Nature's Crossing Technology Center or another economic development initiative that might be identified at a later date. Again, this budget is meant to be a starting point for a conversation, and it gives, I would hope this would give the idea to council several things. One, where does your staff see priority? And then 2, the magnitude of opportunity that you might realize with additional revenue. Do you have any follow-up to that?
I don't know.
So working all the way through the general fund and into the CIP fund, you'll see it on a next step slide, 2 or 3 slides down the presentation. But we would recommend at the next meeting, going through the full 5-year CIP, but also wanted to have a discussion about it here and make sure we're on the right track, on council's priorities and what we want to see, or what you all want to see, what you all want us to produce, and what you all want to see, in a 5-year CIP. So year one, we would start to work through cash flow for NCTC. We do have a reimbursement resolution for that. Or you could use that cash flow to ultimately buy down the ultimate price of the debt on that project if all of the grants don't come through. I think what we've talked about with that project is we'll have a whole lot more clarity on what those grants will end up being in September, October timeframe, and what the final ask for the local funds will be. But so what we would recommend is taking at least a large portion of the $2 million that's left over after you do the potential use of fund balance and pushing it towards that project to make sure we have enough to do the cash flow, make sure that we have enough to push that borrowing into the following year. And based on the work schedules and the grants we have now, we think we can do that. Then we would work through any grant matches that we have on either TAP grants or revenue sharing, anything like that, and any reserves that haven't been, that either need more funding or have been dwindled some and need to be replenished. So then year two, we would work through, so 2026, wrapping up the architectural and engineering with the high school, with working with the schools on the high school project to wrap up how much they would need, or to work to get an understanding of how much more they need to get through architecture and engineering. Work through your final funding on your NCTC. By the time that budget year starts, we should have a pretty good idea of whether we feel like we can completely cash flow, take out a small loan, whatever we need to do with Nature's Crossing during 2026, and then also continued grant matching and reserve funding.
So if we could
Yes, sir.
pause there for a second. I want to be clear that the inclusion of the high school project is meant to illustrate what we would recommend as timing. I think we still need for council to confirm, endorse the project and give us a formal assignment to do that. But we wanted to give you some idea about how quickly we thought that if the project was confirmed, how we might pursue it and at what speed.
And to Mr. Ham's point, just some procedural matters. These years, year 2 through year 5, or year 2 through year 5 and beyond, are or what will be year 5 and beyond, are a plan. The only thing that council would ultimately appropriate next year would be the year 1 items. So these items are a plan and an endorsement. These items we would push through in an appropriation in the June timeframe. And so there's some runway there, if we're on the right track, to bring the full 5-year CIP at the next work session, have council look over it, tweak it how they see fit, and then still have plenty of time to adopt it before the end of June. You probably want to get it adopted before the end of June, because if you don't, those funds will stay in the general fund, and it'll make your financial reports for next year look a little bit funny. But you have multiple meetings scheduled or held tentatively to work through these things, and the only thing you would be officially appropriating in June would be these items. And then if the desire is to work through this piece, the high school funding architecture, year 3 and beyond, we will start to want to plan, well, when would a first debt payment hit on that high school? Do we have any debt payments falling off that can offset some of the increases there? And basically, what's your revenue source for funding that? And most of it's going to be bond funding. And what is the value of that, both in total dollars and in general fund impact each year to transfer to the debt fund to service the payment?
So you would show any debts falling off during that process?
So I would show you a total. So generally what you see on your CIP is just the sources and the usage. You see how you plan on paying for it, and then what you plan on using it on. I think anytime you're issuing debt, you're a little bit far off. If something happens that the interest rates go way up again, that debt payment's going to change. But I can do an estimate on what a $20 million borrowing would be today. Your value of a penny is going to grow between now and then, but I can show you kind of in today's dollars what the impact on that will be from a budget standpoint, from a tax standpoint in that CIP as an annotation to it if that's something that council wants to see.
Yeah, I think in the past, maybe Kenny's question is, I recall seeing a table that had
Our schedule.
our schedule of debt service and when things
Right,
fall off.
yes.
So when we do the, skip forward, when we do the CIP presentation, I'll add a debt presentation to that too. So you can see kind of that's probably 20-year amortization schedule on just kind of what you're expected to pay. Also brings a little bit of a bunny trail, but also a relevant piece on that. You'll see a big drop next year because of the not fully amortized loan that we have. I've talked with the financial advisors on that, and they think that we can refinance it over 10 to 12 years for about the same amount. So we will need to re-amortize the one that one that wasn't fully amortized in 2016. We'll take care of that next year, but I don't think that's going to cause your debt service to increase. They think that we can work through the schedule on that and maybe amortize it over 10 years and get it so that it's the same payment that it is now. So that'll look a little bit funny, but I can again annotate that same thing and say as an estimate, we think that payment will be this much. But that is a little bit of work the council will have to do. We'll work through all the paperwork for it, but there will be a resolution at some point, probably. I think that thing amortizes in August. So a resolution probably somewhere in July to refinance that. And it won't technically be a refinancing because you're going to let the old loan fully come to term and then take out new money to pay it off. But we think the payment in payment terms, it'll be about the same, and that's what we've scheduled for next year. But I can certainly do a debt review and an amortization schedule review so that you can see, I think it's the K Collins debt that falls off in 2028 and any borrowings after that to fall off.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious if we amortized it, do a reset on amortizing it to a 20-year term, just to see what kind of debt service capacity got provided, so that way we could, because between Nature's Crossing and the high school project, the debt service, the rate, the amount of revenue we're gonna need in order to offset that debt is gonna be, fairly substantial and probably sticker shock to folks. And so if you can create some more capacity through the extent to the existing debt and forecasted amortization, then.
And I think that's something that I talked through with the financial advisors is can the RFP, can we do a couple that, can you show us a 12-year amortization, a 15-year and a 20-year amortization from the banks, and what your interest rate's going to go up a little bit the longer you push it out,
Sure.
and the interest payment in aggregate is going to go up a little bit because you're going to pay the interest for longer. But if you can free up some capacity, I had that same thought, and was one of the things I wanted to work through. The only thing being just making sure it does fully amortize this time. That's the main. Get it on a fixed payment, and then if it turns out that the interest rates fall, the interest rates aren't terrible. I think the muni rates are 3.5% now. I always use 4 to estimate. But if the interest rates do fall, you can always refinance that debt.
Is there any ability with the reemergence of the literary loan to rebound, since the source of that debt was a K through 12 project? Is there a possibility with the reemergence of the literary loan program and those very favorable rates
To get into those
to get
rates.
into that rate?
I'll bring that up to Davenport and ask. I don't know with what we did on the refinance if that somehow disconnects it from the original project or not, but it's worth to ask. And it's before we get into any of this,
Since it didn't exist when the first loan was taken, right?
Right, and as we start to work through all of these, a full debt review by Davenport is would probably be prudent as they work through the refinance. Just go ahead and give them our whole portfolio and say, is there anything else in here you would recommend refinancing or put it on different terms? The problem is most folks refinance about if something has become callable in the meantime, there might be some advantages to it, but everything that could be refinanced when the rates were low, we did the refinance work on.
Right.
And we did that work, I think VML did a little bit of work on that for us maybe 2 years ago when we refinanced the note we had. But it's always definitely worth the ask, and so they have some work they need to do for us anyway. So I can ask them all of those questions.
Cameron, can you
Yes, ma'am.
remind me again when the debt service is anticipated to fall off of the Kate Collins project?
I think it's 2028.
Okay.
Do you have something, Mr. Hammond? I can look that up.
I don't, we had talked a little bit about, or had heard from members of council of interest in understanding how we might improve sidewalks. Certainly we have opportunities to make some better and better pedestrian connections, so we're looking at, we talked to Mr. Short about smart scale opportunities there, but we may weave in some of that planning into the CIP, as well as the issue of some of our bright bus stops has come up in terms of accessibility and coverage and just appropriateness. So for a couple of those high stop areas, I don't know that we have any shelter or they're sitting on grass. So we're going to take a look at that. Those would be relatively small CIP projects, but ones that heretofore probably haven't been getting the attention that they need.
Also, some of those little ones are complicated and expensive too.
Sure. It'd be nice to find one though that was achievable and make some progress, but yeah, the little ones can become bigger ones if you're not careful.
Well, while we're still on this slide, I guess I would just sprinkle in a little bit of advocacy to provide some cash infusion to year one for high school design work. To, again, could be something as nominal as a partial year commitment that, because they're gonna have to go through procurement and everything else. It's gonna take 4 months or so to go to do that. And if you did a partial year, at least we're just trying to get a little ahead of the game. Of course, that screws up all your numbers tonight, but
So you can handle that in one of two ways. If you want to speed the project along, we've generally waited until June and July of next year to appropriate fund balance from the previous year. I wouldn't go crazy with appropriating fund balance right after your act was done in November and appropriate it all, because you don't know what exactly you're going to need for your small cap purchases. But if you wanted to do a little bit towards that with a commitment to come back and whatever you did in the CIP the next year, put it back in NCTC in November, if you wanted to do $50,000, $100,000, just to put it as a marker. Or if you wanted to say, leave the CIP plan kind of as envisioned, and then in November have another conversation around your fund balance. You could do either one of those things. There's nothing that holds you up from appropriating that unassigned fund balance from the previous year's act or a little bit earlier. A little bit earlier being, like I said, I think we present in December, so you could have that conversation probably in January. And I don't have any concerns that you're not going to have positive variance this year. The sales tax are strong, the meals tax are strong,
sure.
and our salaries are in good shape. So,
And my only thought with it is that, with an election in November, and who knows who y'all will be working with in January, is if doing that now, making it, memorializing it in the CIP, making a financial commitment to it on July 1 of this year, even if it's a mid-year, actually allocation, at least what that does is, for whoever the city leadership is, that can serve as a prompt, and that says, hey, our community, this is, I'm not saying, an astronomical amount of money, but something to show the spirit of, $50,000, $100,000 allocation to demonstrate something. The design is going to be significant, probably well over $1 million. But again, just an alert to future colleagues, leadership. Because otherwise, what's going to happen is, you could do the fund balance thing in November, but again, you got that, once the act was done, but then you got an election going on, and I don't think anybody's going to have the appetite to divert fund balance into something. So I think, doing that now is more of a symbolic gesture to demonstrate that it is on the radar while on the peripheral. And also, again, not knowing what the makeup will be in January, sets up the next council to sort of contemplate, that they will have the freedom to decide what to do with the fund balance.
Good.
Good.
Yeah.
So Madam Mayor, I looked up your,
If you can get that back to me, I
I
was
have
just
it,
curious.
if that's okay.
Okay.
So it falls off, you'll realize the savings in 2029, last payment in 2028
Okay.
on the Cape Collins Middle School, and then also you have the land purchase that the last payment ends, it looks like about halfway through 2027. So you get some debt reprieve over the next couple of years. It's not going to be enough to fund both of those two projects, but it will be enough to probably offset some of the
Some of the
burden on
expense.
the
Okay.
real estate tax piece.
Okay. Me or you?
You can do them all.
Go.
Okay. So when we chatted about enterprise fund rates at the last work session, we had talked about there's a little bit more pressure in water, no pun intended, than there is in the sewer, than there is in the sewer fund. And so as we started to look through the sewer and the water fund, I started to realize that the customer service serves both of those, but is only allocated into the water fund at this point. So what we were able to do was allocate a repayment of about half of the customer service back to the water fund from the sewer fund. And so what it ends up in is about a $300,000 payment back from the sewer fund to the water fund. And what that does is it allows you to keep both of the rates kind of below what inflation has been the last couple of years. But that $300,000 will basically pay for a debt service at the Shenandoah Village Drive pump station. The estimate on that project was about $4 million, and the debt service, I think, on 20 years at 5% was about $320,000. You still need a little bit of increase in the water fund, mostly because of inflationary pressures on equipment, pipes, all of those things, and labor. But then you also, that fund, the fund balance isn't necessarily growing extremely quickly, so there's also a piece of equipment built into that rate as well. The sewer rate, the sewer fund and the sewer rates, the sewer fund, we had equipment in there that we ultimately cut, and that position in that fund's healthy. I wouldn't put the burden of that piece of equipment on that rate right now. There's enough in that position to take care of that. No increase in stormwater utility fee, just with the understanding that as we work through the new permit next year, there's probably some work to be done there in the next fiscal year. And then $2 per month in the refuse collection rates, and that is, I think the outcome on that, or the net value of that, is about $160,000, and the increase in the transfer to the landfill is about $178,000. So that rate pretty much just flips straight to the landfill to cover their cell development, their scale house movement, the next cell development, as I think Mr. Hamp alluded to in his presentation. And then a quick reminder, just in case we don't make it back to it, as the landfill started going through their budget, started to realize that some of the operating costs were being covered, were in the operating costs weren't, or the operating revenues weren't completely covering the operating costs there. And so basically what happens is the localities are responsible to fill that in. So their recommendation was to adjust the tipping fees, which I don't think have been adjusted since 2008. They made that recommendation to the landfill board, landfill committee,
Yes.
whatever the appropriate name is, to take back to their locality. So as part of this process, we'll bring an adjusted tipping fee. That's the fee that you pay when you go across the scales if you're a commercial hauler out there. And we hope that will, one, help stave off future rate increases in the refuse fund, but then also make it so that the landfill is wholly operated on the tipping fees, and that way the only burden coming back to the refuse fund are the capital fees. And then this slide just shows the total adjustment in sewer and water based on, we use 10,000 gallons average on a bi-monthly bill. Shows the current estimate at that rate, and then shows the proposed for a change per bill cycle, and then a change per year. And that's just that times 6, because we bill by monthly.
So next steps, we have a scheduled work session on April 10th. We'll go over the CIP in more detail and again, solicit your feedback and comment on how we're doing for alignment and where we might be headed, where the general fund is concerned, and the enterprise funds for that matter. The 17th, we have another work session scheduled if necessary. And then our goal is to have the public hearings on the budget in April, of the second meeting in April, and then adopt in early May. I would say, as is the case, if we need an additional meeting to get confirmation and comfort with the budget, we can certainly do that. But I think it's preferable if we can adopt in the first meeting of May.
Very good.
Okay, I just had one quick question just to reaffirm. So you are not recommending that the city needs at this moment to increase revenue to support Deputy 2 Commissioner of Revenue, Deputy Director of Elections, Deputy Sheriff, 5 part-time sheriff positions, 9 firefighter positions, and a fire hydrant technician?
So that's correct. If you reflect on our recent retreat experience and one of the benefit or consequence of having retreats and check-in along the way, achieving alignment more early, is that you get alignment a lot more early. And I did not hear sufficient interest across the body to receive a budget that recommended rate increases.
Well, not to press, but it's not, is it your recommendation based off of your detecting support or lack of support, or not your recommendation because you don't feel those positions and services are required?
So my recommendation is based on the priorities that were communicated to me generally from the body, which include affordability, public safety, employee compensation, I think that's it's support for the schools. I think what I try to communicate in my message is that as we grow and we've operated for some time at a very low tax rate. We've operated for some time with relatively stable staffing levels. I think there are opportunities, as the council directs, to make additional investment in our community, whether it's operating or capital investment. I would not recommend, in terms of some of the requests that we receive from departments, I don't think furnishing 9 firefighters in a single budget year would be my recommendation. I think we would want to pursue that in a marginal way. What I've tried to do is lay out a path where if there is sufficient direction or interest or desire on the part of the council, how you might make progress towards some of those staffing levels.
Yeah, my experience has been, it's easier to find opportunities to reduce based off of public perception and feedback. I mean, fire departments asked for 9 positions for years, and we've not given them 1. So, I mean, with all the housing growth and all that, because at one level, I mean, it's one of the reasons we have such an awesome and professional staff is you all can make recommendations based off of that growth, of what you believe the need to be. And so I don't think it's any of our duty to lean in and say, well, we had 300 COs issued, or 160 certificate of occupancies issued last year, so that must mean we need another firefighter. That's what we rely on you.
Right.
And so when you come back and say, well, they've asked for 9 positions again, and I'm not recommending any of them, because that would require you to come back and make a recommendation to us to increase the tax rate a penny. We're not afforded that opportunity, right? Instead, we're having 5 novice who care about our community are having to pivot and hypothesize what the service needs are of the community, right? To
I think I would share my experience in the following way. That this council and the previous councils have every opportunity to furnish direction to a manager to say, we want you to bring us a recommended budget that you think the community needs, and you are liberty to bring that budget without restraint. What I believe I've heard in recent years, and for the majority of my career, is we want you to balance that judgment against affordability.
okay.
And so I think if you look at our experience last year, now it was exceptional. It probably doesn't furnish a typical example, but we have always tried to insulate and protect the taxpayer from onerous impacts of either assessments or rates. And last year we adjusted the tax rate from 90 cents to 77 cents. And that was, I don't think that was an easy decision for the council to make. I think there was some debate about whether it should have been 79 or 77 or 74. So I hear what you're saying, Mr. Short, but, and maybe I've misread, but I think I've been given balancing priority to affordability. And I think that I'm trying to respond to you.
In fairness to you, I mean, this is something that we've talked about, offline, quite a bit about, I think we just have a different take on the approach.
Sure.
And so that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your work. You did a great job. I'm
Thanks.
very appreciative.
Well, we're not done. We're just getting started.
I know
So,
you are. I'm appreciative for the work that you've presented so far, and I'll hear more.
all right. I don't have anything. Do y'all have anything? Any more questions? All righty. Thank y'all.
Thank you.